he's much more relaxed, I would say. I had a conversation with his wife and his kids, and they're like, I don't know what you did to Roman, but he is a different person. Just a little bit happier, can't stop talking about grazing, a little extra pep in the step, whistling a tune once in a while. I mean, things that you never used to do. Thank you, and good morning. Lots of familiar faces out here. So I guess I wanted to express my gratitude that you are willing to give up a Saturday morning to listen to us and present this morning. You could be doing a bunch of other things. I know that. I could be too, possibly. But you chose to be here, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you. So you see the title of the talk, Managed Grazing, linking it all together. Obviously, you hear the term climate change, right? And this is why Powered Up Baraboo started, was we're trying to address the whole issue of climate change and environmental protection. And so when I got hired 27 years ago, my job was watershed management. And so we're looking, watershed is any land that sheds water to a stream or to a lake. That's why they call it a watershed. And so, so how we manage that land then impacts the quality of the water and the streams. So if you've noticed the Baraboo River, after rain events, it looks like chocolate milk. It's not supposed to look like that. So obviously there's an issue with that. And so maybe perhaps if we manage the land better, actually we know that that's true, then that water is a little bit cleaner then, that runs into our streams and lakes. And so for the longest time, grazing was, so we have this toolbox filled with practices, conservation practices that we tap into. And, so one of the players that was in there is grazing, but it was a small player. And we were taking care of the symptoms of the problems. So we put in concrete barnyards, and we would put in grass waterways, and we would do those structural things that were really addressing the symptom of the problem. We weren't getting at the root of it, which was the health of our soils. That's like where so many things start, whether it's releasing carbon into the atmosphere or taking nutrients with it down into the Gulf of Mexico. It starts with our soils. And so the health of our soils impacts almost everything, believe it or not. So if you look at societies, our country's pretty new. It's only just a few hundred years old. You go to some of these Middle Eastern countries, remember the Fertile Crescent, Mesopotamia, super rich soils, deep, dark. It was a breadbasket of that area. And the resources, the soils got mismanaged. I mean, there were some geopolitical things going on too, but like once the resources were gone, no longer could it support human life, and so people vacated that area. And we kind of think it would never happen to us here in the U.S. Because we'll find a way to advance past it, but we're already seeing signs of it. We've seen it forever, as far as like I told you, Baraboo River, just take a look at it. I used to fish Lake Wisconsin on a regular basis, and I kind of quit doing that because it gets putrid green. But that's all coming from the watersheds that drains into it. And so obviously the way we were attacking things weren't working very well. So the last 5 or 6 years or so, our department has really taken a shift. And we've shifted away from like looking at the symptoms and addressing them and looking at the root cause. And so I mentioned earlier that it was soils. The gold standard when it comes to soil life is obviously prairies, but planting prairies, you can't make money on that, right? It's just hard to cash flow that. It's pretty and it's great, but you can't cash flow it. But grazing is the next best thing, in my opinion. And so that's why I've just kind of dove headfirst into rotational grazing, because it's the hardest shift to make too. It takes an awful lot of effort to change the mindset so that this is more acceptable. You know, for the longest time, grazing was seen as those are the tree huggers and the hippies, and that's all. I don't want to have anything to do with that. But I think that's changing, for sure. In our county, for sure, it's changing, and I like that. So I do have a lot of uncomfortable conversations with producers, and this is one of them right here. Your why. Like, what are you doing this for? Why are you even farming? Are you happy doing it, or are you trapped into this, unfortunately? So sometimes people that I work with, they inherit the farm from mom and dad, who inherited it from grandma and grandpa. And every generation, there's just a little bit bigger debt load, and the prices don't reflect that debt load necessarily of the product that they're selling. And so you feel trapped. The feeling of trapped really is somewhat prevalent in the farming community that I've noticed. And so, you know, sometimes the zest isn't there for farming anymore. And so, that's a basic question that I ask, why? So I'm going to give you this, grazing talk and pitch, but like, you have to know why you're even doing any of this. Otherwise, it won't stick. That's what I've noticed, is that if we don't have this figured out in here, it's just the next flash in the pan. And then we move on to something else, and another flash in the pan, and we move on to something else. And so, when everything is rooted in here, it just seems like it works better and it sticks. And so that's why I spend a lot of time talking through that. Basic question. That seems so basic, but there's got to be a reason you got out of bed this morning, right? And so with all of this, I can't expect them to answer these questions unless I've answered them myself. And so taking the time to figure out, well, why did I show up here this morning? Why am I talking to you this morning? What's the whole point of all this? I know my why. And it comes through, I hope. One of the books that I read that really made an impact on me was Viktor Frankl's book. So most of you probably know this book already, but he was in the concentration camps, but he also happened to be like a psychologist of sort. And so while he's there, he's paying attention to what's happening to the victims. And what he noticed over and over again, even in the roughest of conditions, if somebody had a reason for being, a meaning to their life, maybe they want to see a loved one, or they have some artwork they want to finish up, or they're just stuff that really gives them a reason, a meaning, they survived for the most part. As soon as they lost that was it. It was within days. That's what it says in the book. Within days, these people passed. And so and I kind of took that to heart as I'm working with the producers that I work with. I'm like, we have to figure out why and what's your meaning, and so that you can weather the storm and stay the course. So you don't just jump off ship just because, I had a couple animals die, I'm done. This was stupid. Nope, this is the right course and I'm going to go. So I just love this saying. If you don't know where you're going, and your road will take you there, meaning the next flashiest thing, you're going to grab a hold of it, right? And off you go. I mean, this happens a lot to us humans, I think, Maybe you see the next YouTube sensation and off they go with that. Well, I got to try this, I got to try that. It's just, we aren't rooted as well. And so I like to go through this exercise with my producers. And if you don't know where you're going, how do you know when you get there? Are you just going to chase? Like you don't have a roadmap, so you can just keep chasing. Like, well, I'm here and I'm making enough, but there's more. There's always more, right? And so it's like, so we actually stepped through like, okay, so this is why you're doing what you're doing. And then this is the meaning that it has for you. How much is it going to cost for you to get to that? Okay, now when you get there, okay, you're there. And is that enough? You can adjust if you want to, but you got to have a goal. You got to have a plan. And so that's the goals and objectives. We go through this whole process. This is about a 4 to 6 hour process that I try to go through. So people, and it's not necessarily all at once, it's like little bits at a time. And eventually, when they do go into grazing, I want them rooted in it and stay there and expand and sell it, and which is what Roman has done for me. He's one of my biggest salesmen when it comes to rotational grazing. So we're in the prairie region here, right on the edge of it, I would say, but the Great Central Plains, Midwest Prairie region. This is what the land looked like. So a lot of you probably know this grass. That's big blue stem. This is a kind of a complex prairie with the forbs and everything. This is what it looked like. Nature abhors bare soil. And when you drive around the countryside, you see bare soil. So what does she usually do? She fills it with weeds right off the bat. That's to protect, that's the skin, basically. And so she wants to cover it up right away, but back a few hundred years, it was always covered up. Lots of vegetation. The root systems on these plants are, they're crazy, like from the ceiling all the way down to the floor here, 10 to 15 feet deep. These prairie plants had root systems that were massive. And those roots are carbon dioxide that was taken out of the atmosphere, combined with some water, I'm just oversimplifying it, and fused together with the sun's energy in the form of photosynthesis and put down into the roots. Glucose, sugar. And as those roots die, that carbon dioxide is now trapped in the soil. So every time we till, so once you learn this, I haven't tilled my garden now for 6 years. Every time you till, you lose, 30% of your organic matter. That carbon dioxide is put back into the atmosphere. So we want to get to where we're not tilling. It's not always possible, I get it. But these deep root systems created these mollisol soils. They're super deep, dark soils that we have here. And there's a consequence to that, a positive consequence. And the stream banks were pretty stable. The streams were deeper, cleaner, very stable banks because of all this vegetation and management. The wildlife is very diverse, so there's the megafauna and then there's the microfauna. And there are things that we just can't see with the naked eye, but we know that in a teaspoon of soil, there's more life than there is people on earth in just 1 teaspoon of soil. And so they're really the heroes. They just don't get the glory because you can't see them. They're in there doing their thing. Efficient nutrient cycling that happens. So what does this really mean? So 300 years ago, they didn't extract natural gas out of the ground, converted it to fertilizer, and then spread it on the landscape in order to keep the system going. It did it by itself. And I would say it did it mainly from the power of the sun to create plants, which then powers everything. And it cycles it through the dung and the urine at that point, and trampling. So this is a diversity of our farms nowadays, through a lot of different processes. There used to be a lot more dairy farms, but those dairy farms just can't compete. They're going out of business, unfortunately. And so then we take hay out of the landscape that used to be there. And sometimes hay, though, we will do infiltration tests on hay ground, and it's not as good as you think. It looks green and looks nice, but there's a lot of heavy equipment that goes across that ground, and it compacts it, actually. So it doesn't infiltrate as well. But it added some diversity, at least. And this is the diversity of your farms right now. And that's what we're up against. So here's the mid-continental plains, the grasslands that I was talking about. And you can see we're right on the edge of it here, in that Prairie Peninsula area. And what's really interesting is, look where our primary farmland is. It follows it almost perfectly. And I think they're having some issues with the Ogallala Aquifer down in this area. We're extracting it at an alarming rate. But this is where the farms are located. That's where the mollisol soils are, the deep, rich mollisols. So many of you have probably seen this. This is the Dust Bowl of the 30s. And I kind of thought we were past this, but my parents live in Plover, Stevens Point area. And every year we have to wash the side of the house because there's still plenty of wind erosion yet that's occurring right now. And so I would argue that we still have quite a ways to go. So the consequences of what we do up here really manifests itself in this dead zone right down in here. That's in New Orleans. And we went down there for a family vacation about 4 or 5 years ago, and I thought, I have to see this dead zone for myself. It was a 95-degree day, hot and muggy. Of course, our 2 boys just jumped right in, you know, and I wasn't jumping into that. Because I looked around, and literally there was no life in that. What should have been just teeming with life, there was no life in there. It really was a dead zone. And so, not that I wasn't convinced before, but seeing is believing, I would say. So, this would be in the Kickapoo River watershed. So the stream, the top of the stream bank is supposed to be right about here. Look where it is. There's a person with a horse right there. And if you look, there's 12 to 15 feet of stream bank sediment in our. So here's how streams are supposed to look. We have the stream bottom, goes up a little bit, then we have a terrace, goes up a little bit, and we have another terrace. What's happened is, through our mismanagement of the watershed, there's such excessive erosion that what we now have is we don't have the terraces. So Mother Nature, she wants her terrace back. So she moves the stream back and forth. In the process of doing it, dumping all that sediment in. And if you come back just far enough, you'll notice the terrace forming. I mean, in the 27 years that I've been here, you can see the terraces forming in some of these streams. But there are some disturbing pictures, I would say, of like fence posts, and that gets filled in with sediment, so they put another fence post on top of it, filled in with sediment, another fence post on top of that. That is a lot of sediment that really doesn't belong there. So I just presented you some of the problems, but so what do we do about it? Well, there's lots of different ways. This is just one way. And I feel like this is probably the most effective way and profitable way to accomplish what we would like. So what is grazing? What is managed grazing? It's just a flexible way of like moving animals through paddocks in a way that mimics nature. So all of this is about mimicking Mother Nature. And the reason I say that is because ruminants are animals that can convert grass into energy. If you and I just ate grass, we would get nothing out of it except for some roughage and some fiber. That's about it. But animals can actually, they have a ruminants, I should say. They have this 4-chambered stomach that can extract it. And it's all microorganisms that are doing the work in the gut, really, is what it is. And that extracts the energy out of the grass, breaks down the cellulosic structure of the grass itself so they can extract it and use it for energy. So they've evolved with grass. They know what to do with it. These are the original ruminants that roamed this area. So if you can just use your imagination for a minute for me, just humor me. So you're coming across on your covered wagon in the year 1830, we'll just say. I think that's about right. About, say, year 1830, you're coming across and you're looking for settlement west. And you come across Sauk County area, and we have oak savannas, like littering the landscape, I would say. It's a hot day, and you need a break. And so you go underneath one of these majestic oak trees in the oak savanna, and you take a break from the hot sun, and you pour yourself a glass of water, and you set it down. It wouldn't be a glass. It would pour yourself a tin cup of water, and you set it down. And while you're sitting there, you notice that your tin is shaking, and the water inside it is shaking. It's like, what is going on? And and you look up and you see across the horizon coming at you a herd of bison, numbering by the millions or hundreds of thousands, across the landscape coming at you. And if you were so fortunate as to also see the passenger pigeons come through at that time by the millions, and they didn't just go one wide, one high, they were on top of each other this way, so it was almost an eclipse when they came through. So you're surrounded by bison and passenger pigeons, which are now extinct, by the way. And that's what this landscape evolved under since the last glaciation, which was about 12,000 years ago. It's these ruminants roaming the landscape. That's why grazing works, because we're mimicking what was here, but in a more modern way and practical way. So we have this thing called the rainfall simulator, best tool in our toolbox by far. I mean, in the last 30 years that I've been working here, this is like by far the best thing I've ever seen as far as like making the point and visually. So we have a trailer. It has all these gadgets in it, basically. And what we do is we actually go into actual fields, and we have a cutter that's like this. And we pound it into the soil. We use a shovel, and we scoop the soil up, and we place it in these pans that you see here. And so literally, probably all over Sauk County, there's these like squares. If someone from outer space came by, like, what is that? You know, how did that get there? Let's do a study on that, you know. And so we have quite a few of these. And so what we'll do, we'll look at overgrazed pasture. We'll look at tillage. We're still tilling 70-some% of our soils in Sauk County. I mean, this is 2022. I think we got to get past that. But tillage, which is common, and we look at perennial pasture. And what you see over and over, and we'll go to Romans a lot to get some of the well-grazed pasture samples. But what you see over and over again is wherever we have tillage, so these jars in front catch the runoff. These jars behind actually catch infiltration. And that's the part that's really, really interesting. So we apply water. There's actually a water spigot right here. It sprays like about an inch of water in 2 minutes. I mean, it's a lot. And so what you'll notice almost always is dirty water coming out of these areas that are mismanaged. But here's perennial pasture, managed grazing. Water is clean. Very little of it actually runs off, and most of it is right there, infiltrating into the ground, which is what it's supposed to do. So like when the bison used to come through, they've estimated that only about 10% of the rainwater actually ran off the landscape. 90% of it infiltrated. We're up to 40% running off now. And that's the difference. And that's why we have flash flooding that we do. And so can we counter the excessive rains? Actually, you can with good land management. That's how we can adapt to that. You know, like good, like grazing management, we can counter some of that. So managed grazing is all about like how intensely do you move them. So what typically happens is we put animals in one paddock over 30 days, just as an example. With managed grazing, you put 30 paddocks for 30 days. You move them every day. And in doing that, the first paddock you went to, by the time you come back, it's grown back up, see? Then it's ready to go. So we'll graze it 4 or 5 rotations. And we'll start roughly from May 1st till October 31st. And some producers will graze into December. I know, Roman, did you graze to December this year? Yep, we'll graze to December. And normally, if you don't rotational graze, you're feeding hay by September or August. And the highest price for raising animals, the biggest expense is feed. And so the less you can do that, the better. We'll just go through some of these quick. Greater water infiltration. So just to give you an example, we have these pipes. They're 6-inch diameter pipes that we pound into the ground, and we'll pour an inch of water in and measure how long it takes for that inch of water to infiltrate. And so on a lot of our fields, that are cropland, it'll take an hour, hour and a half for that water to infiltrate. We do the same test on managed grazing, 30 seconds. I mean, it's significant. It is very significant. And so when it says greater water infiltration, that's true. And you can see it for ourselves. Higher soil organic matter, because you're not tilling it up and releasing the carbon dioxide that you just sequestered. You know, because you're not doing that, you do raise the organic matter. Soil temperature. So our set point is 98.6 as humans, but the soil actually has its own set point. It's about 70 degrees, plus or minus a few degrees. And so one year I thought, oh, how true is this really? I read about this and I thought, let's see how true it is. So I got a bunch of soil thermometers and covered up my garden at home. And I think I had like 4 or 5 thermometers, and sure enough, 95 degrees out, it was 70, 72. It could be 50 out, it was 70. That's the state that it wants to be in. And so that's what we're shooting for. And because nature abhors, and she does not like bare soil, she can maintain that temperature. But when we till it up and expose the soil, now it's running a fever, basically. And when nature runs a fever, the critters that live underground in that soil actually start to die off. They know that at 90 degrees, it starts to die off. And 100 degrees, a lot of things are dead in there. And soil life is the most important piece in soil health. And once we realize that soil is alive, that changes how we treat it. It always does. Something about animals that change. So like when we know there's a living thing, it changes our behavior towards it. It always does, right? I mean, what's the internal rate of return of having a pet? There is none. But what is it about pets? Because it's a living thing. And so when we see our soils as a living thing, it seems like we treat it better. Top productivity, top quality. So this is the sequence. Animals intake the forage. They leave some of the forage behind. So the goal is like you take half, leave half. And the reason for that is that leaf is the solar panel of the plant. And so when we take it down to the nubs, basically it has to draw from the battery that's underground, which is in the roots. And that takes a lot longer, and it really weakens the plant when you do that. So when you only take half, you leave enough of the solar panel behind so it can grow back quicker. So a good way to think about it is like you have to waste grass to make more grass. That's just kind of how it works. And then we rotate to the next subdivision, and we let it rest. And in the beginning, like here in May, coming up here, we might only be resting for, 21 days, but like by July and August, we may have to rest for 45, 50 days. That's just, we read the grass, and act accordingly. So, and it isn't really gizmos. It's not a bunch of stuff. It's management that makes this work, which is what I like about it, because you don't have to shell out you don't have to get the latest tractor, the latest harvester, the latest planter, the best sprayer, the best seed. You don't have to do any of that. You just manage. You set it up and then you manage. And I like that because it's more sustainable, I think, that way economically. So we talk about water quality. So management makes the difference between this and something like this with all this vegetation here. The animals are having access to the stream in one spot right here, which is fine because they're there for a little bit and then they're out. That's kind of how this works. And so I don't discourage people from grazing their streams, because when the bison came through, what did they do? They didn't go, whoa, we got a stream. We got to walk all the way around 30 miles because we can't go across it. Nope, they just went right across it. But then they didn't come back again for 2 or 3 years. And that's why what we're going to do here is like you move them through. Roman, I think you move your animals almost twice a day sometimes, right? Yeah. And so some folks move their animals 4 or 5 times a day, especially when they're trying to put on weight to finish the animal. Finish meaning getting them fat enough so that they can be slaughtered, so that we can eat them. Continuous grazing. So up above there, it has a picture of what our streams look like when we overgraze them. They tend to shallow up and they widen out and they soak in a lot of radiation from the sun, and when you've got warmer water, it holds less oxygen, and less oxygen, less life, less fish, less invertebrates that the fish rely on too. And so with grazing, what we start to see is like the stream gets narrower and deeper and cooler then. And as cooler and cleaner, obviously, too, it just tends to hold more life then. But another reason, I don't know how many of you are birders here, but what's cool about grazing, it's so quiet. I mean, sometimes it's deafening quiet, like you can hear your ears ringing, it's so quiet, which is really cool. I like that personally, versus the, all day long. And I think we almost get numb to the sound of the tractor and the machine. It just becomes normal. That when that gets taken away because you're moving animals on foot or on a quick UTV trip and then you're on foot, it's just quiet. You tend to listen to the birds more. Here we have a meadowlark here. And everywhere they do these experiments, bird counts, the grazing areas, the well-managed grazing areas, definitely has a lot more. So what kind of birds are we talking? Upland sandpiper, horned lark, grasshopper sparrow, eastern meadowlark, bobolinks, sedge wren, Henslow sparrows. There's all kinds of different ones. So our goal with grazing is to have animals at the right place at the right time for the right reasons. And there's a lot of help out there for that. So I kind of want to bring it closer to home now. So some of these folks you probably know. This is the Yerkes farm, and it's just north of town. It's literally like attached to town. And it's a dairy farm. And if you'll notice, there's double lines here. These are lanes because they have to get back to the barn for milking twice a day. So they have to find a way to get them there. And how do we do that? Well, we put in lanes. It's just a fence there and a fence here, and that's their avenue back. And they walk back. And so some of these animals are probably walking maybe a half a mile back. But there's 145 acres. There's just all grass and legumes right now with lots of bird life. So that place, and a lot of the places look like this when we first come onto the scene. And what I was telling you, how the Baraboo River looks a bit chocolate brown after rains, this is what it looks like. But how did it look like that? Well, it's starting from our fields. And obviously there's sediment in the stream too that gets churned up, but we're still losing way too much. And so we want it to go from this to this. And so this is the very first year of conversion. And what we normally do is the plants that you see here are oats as a cover crop to provide a quick pop and protect the soil. And we also incorporate some legumes in there, meaning some white clover, some red clover, some alfalfa. And there's 4 different species of grass, and then nature fills in another 40 within 4 years or so. If you really look through your pastures, you don't have to plant everything. She just fills it in. And weed is in the eye of the beholder. So that's a hard one to get through. It's like, no, that's not a weed. Your animals will eat it. So like giant ragweed is a classic example. It looks like crap, and as humans, we want to take that out. The animals go right to that. You release them into a ragweed field or into a pasture with a lot of ragweed, they go right to that and de-leaf the ragweed. So it's obviously not a weed, right? Because they're eating it. And so how does the system work? Well, we have perimeter fence, and lots of times it's electrified perimeter fence. And part of the dangers of my job is electrocution. I get zapped plenty, doing show and tells, even during our pasture walks. You get one of those. But we got electric fence around it, and then there's an interior fence too. And then so the animals need access to water wherever they are. They need access to grass, and they need access to each other. They're herd animals. You can't just put one animal out there. You really better have at least 2. But lots of times we have more than that. But so if you see these water lines are put underneath the fence so they're not in the way. And what we have are these quick disconnect couplers that we can detach it from here, and we pull the hose and a tank along. Literally, we dump the water we pull it to the next paddock, hook it up, and these couplers are about every 150 feet apart. So that wherever they are, they always have water. And then we use a polywire type system. So this is just, it's nylon rope in essence, but then they weave conducting electric wires into it that rolls up. It's super handy. It's something that wasn't around during the bison times. We're imitating nature, but not to the full extent. So this is at the Yerkes farm. Look at that. There is no erosion. There's just sequestering of carbon into the soil and building organic matter in that scene. And here they are again. There just is no erosion. These pictures make me wish winter was over. It's really nice. Gives me some hope. Here's another farm that we work with. This is the McCluskey farm. And so they do a and they gave me some product too here this morning to hand out. But they had dairy cows, which we put on one side, and they also have beef cows. So there's quite a few acres converted here. We got 90, 120 acres or so put in. But this is the system. So the dotted line is a perimeter fence and the yellow lines. And the red line is actually the interior fence. And all that is like one strand of high electric wire. And it's about 32 inches high or so. And they're about, 200 to 250 feet wide. And then what we do is we take that poly wire and we stretch it from one to the other. And we stretch another one here. Now they're in there. They have access to water. And then we just keep moving them. So in essence, you can start subdividing this. And then when you get to here, there's an opening. We come over. We work our way down. And then there's an opening. We come over. We'll work our way over. And then we'll do this. And then we'll start again. That's kind of that's the concept. And so all of a sudden, by the time they get back to where they started, a lot of the plants are growing again because we left enough of the solar panel. So here's kind of what that, that lane system looks like on the dairy side for the McCluskey farm. You can see the dairy cows are up there doing their thing. Yep, and we have Queen Anne's lace. That's this stuff here, and everybody hates it. It is kind of pretty, but the animals won't eat it either. So I just say don't worry about it. Just live with it because, the seeds are in the soil, and it's not going anywhere. You can spray it all you want, but it's in the soil by the trillions. So I just don't know if you're going to get ahead of it. So just work with it. I don't think it hurts that much. So here are their dairy animals again. Here's another dairy site. What we were noticing was that their animals, this is Ken Nolan's farm. He's got dry cows and heifers out here grazing. And what we were noticing was like, why are they, he was noticing his tubs were getting tipped over. He's on some hilly ground. And so I actually took, it's like a camera we use for deer hunting. I posted it so we could see what was doing. And they were not getting enough water. And so when they were stressed, they would tip it over. And we just turned up the pressure, and then that kind of went away. That's how I got some of these footages. So the animals would give birth to calves out here. And so we have a lane system that takes them back to the barn then. That's kind of how that works. And you might see these signs. So at the Yerkes farm, I have one stationed there. And that was by design. Because what we were finding was grazing looks messy, right? We like things like nice and tidy, like the lawns need to be just so, and trimmed here and everything. And so, but grazing, if it looks like that when you're grazing, you're doing it wrong, actually. That means you're overgrazing, because what they're supposed to trample a bunch down, they eat some of it, they leave a lot go, and so it looks like you're wasting grass. Remember what I said? You have to waste grass to make more grass. And so we wanted to advertise that, like, no, we actually planned it to look this way. And if you're curious, call us. And we're getting some calls as a result of that, and it's been positive. And we're I think we're in the process of making more signs to kind of spread around. Roman has one at his place. He's on a very busy highway, and so it's a great place to advertise grazing. This is another one of my dairy people. Just the same concept. Interior fence, water lines, move them through. And everyone's different. It's not anything nice and square. Now he needed to get minerals out to his animals, and he had quite a few heifers out here. And so he just made up his own, and he pulls that behind an ATV, and it works. And here, again, being economical, he just cut a 55-gallon barrel in half, put a float in there, just like a toilet basically is all this is. And as soon as this float gets down, it opens up a valve here and fills it up to a certain point, shuts it off. You don't have to baby it. And so as soon as they're drinking, it's refilling at the same time. So a little tub like this can service a lot of animals. And this didn't cost him anything. That's the whole goal. My goal is for them not to spend anything, but to make money. So I don't know if I have this percentage perfect, but I think it's like 60% of our food source is reliant on pollinators, something like that. I don't know if somebody can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but it's an awful lot of our food comes from pollinators. There, you see the honeybee up here, and I'm not sure if anybody sees that, but the bumblebees and the honeybees and the native bees, their populations are really taking a dive bomb right now. And what they're finding is that's the neonicotinoids that's being used in our seeds. So like when we plant corn, we'll just say, that's what dominates the landscape. They coat the seeds in this neonicotinoid insecticide. And when the plant grows, it's actually in the plant itself. And so it's killing a lot of our insects. Well, with grazing, we don't spray it. You shouldn't be spraying it, in my opinion. And so they really flourish. So like I'll walk through the pasture. I'll show you a picture here. This was from last year. You walk through a pasture and at the right time of the year, it's just blooming and you hear buzzing because there's so much activity out there. So it supports our pollinators, which we need more of too. And it's just pretty to look at. And it's diverse. Again, we're slowly mimicking nature a little bit with the diversity of plants that are out there. Now this one, I want to play this. I'm hoping that I can play this for you. So we're talking about bird life. These are bobolinks. So here's our subdivider fence right here. And so there's 2 bobolinks right here right now. And the last summer they were just, so there was never a bobolink on this farm. If you build it, they will come. They really do. They really do. And so, I'm not sure if you can hear it. And so these are the things that I like to send out to my producers. Okay, so what does this all mean? Obviously, my number one job is to protect the natural resources, but I want to do it in a way that's also good for the pocketbook of the farmers that are doing this stuff. And so, and I think we're finally there. We can show that it's profitable, and it also conserves at the same time. And so I just looked through the numbers the last couple of days, like, okay, what have we done here? So since 2000, so this is kind of how it went along. For the first 20 years of my career, we'd get maybe 0 to 5 to 10 acres a year into rotational grazing. And it was mostly because, partly because I didn't know how to talk about it the right way. But I would say most of it was, we weren't running the numbers. It's like, I'm a trained conservationist, not a financial analyst, right? That's not what I went to school for. But, so I would, hey, this is really good for the environment. Okay, but does it pay the bills? Well, I don't know, but it's really good for the environment, you know, so you should do it. Well, that sounds really good until you look at your own situation. I looked at my own. It's like, okay, so should we get a vehicle this year to replace our clunker? Well, honey, let's look at the finances, right? Should we go on vacation? And if we do, what should we do? Are we going to camp for a week, or are we going to stay in a hotel once or twice? Well, let's look at the finances. I'm always doing that. I mean, we're all doing that all the time, and yet I'm expecting farmers to just do it because it's the right thing for the environment. It has to go together, right? That's the whole sustainability thing. Economics have to go in. I was figuring out the environmental piece, but I don't think I was thinking through the social and the economic piece. So we enlisted some help of people like Paul Dittman, who this is what they do for a living, and started running through the numbers. And I was working Roman over for years. It looked 5 years, yep. I would come over, say, hey, Roman, what do you think about grazing? He'd do a little bit on his own. So I'm like, I finally kind of did through the enterprise budgeting. It's like, Roman, why don't you come over and let's talk through this? And 20 minutes after that discussion, he goes, put the whole farm in. And it was the finances that did it, which makes perfect sense. So we went from 0 to 5 acres to that year, we went to 600 acres, converted to grass, from 0 to 600. And the next year was 1,065. Then we had 700. Last year we had 619. This year alone, we have another 500 to 600 acres going into grass. So since 2017, 3,700 acres converted to, I know it's a drop in the bucket. If you add up the acres in the county, it's a drop in the bucket, but it's a heck of a lot more than we ever had. And people are seeing it and talking about it, which is awesome. So what does that mean? Well, that's almost 41,000 tons of soil that we keep out of our streams and lakes and rivers every year. So what does that look like? Well, if you got a 12,000, a lot of dump trucks, you can fill 12-ton dump truck. It's pretty common. And so I just did the math, and it's about 3,300 dump trucks. And if you line those dump trucks up, I went out and actually measured some dump trucks to get the, because I had to be as accurate as I could with this. And you line them up end to end, it's 17 miles long. That's how much soil we're keeping out of the stream by converting it to grass like this. Perennial vegetation, no tillage. And the thing is, it's every year. It's like that. So I told you before that water infiltration really increases when we have good vegetation and it's managed well and mimics the bison herds. And so I checked with some engineers, and it's about 70,000 gallons per acre that we keep from running off by converting to grazing. So if you just do the math, it's 263 million gallons basically that is no longer running off and causing flooding in our streams. And so I did the math again, tried to figure out, okay, how many dump trucks full of water is that? And it's 109,000 or so dump trucks full. And so when you put them end to end, it's 561 miles long. That's every year now. And so I was like, how far is that? Well, so just, like Google mapped it, and from Baraboo to Jamestown is about 500 and some miles. That's how much water that we're preventing from going into the stream every year. And that's only with 3,700 acres. So my goal is to have half the county at least in grass, but I don't think we're going to get there. But it's significant, the difference that it makes. So along with the sediment that runs off, so phosphorus is what causes this greening in freshwater. That's like the key ingredient in freshwater. And so with the 3,700, it's about 0.9 pounds per. So what it does is it comes along for the ride. So when we erode soil, the phosphorus is attached to that soil, and so we are also eroding phosphorus into our. There's also dissolved phosphorus, but a majority of the phosphorus is actually attached to soil. So what does that mean? Well, 35,000 pounds of phosphorus kept out of our stream every year. And 35,000 pounds, which doesn't, again, seem like much, but that can green up about a 35,000 acre lake that's 10 feet deep. So we need a reference point. Devil's Lake is 374. 95 Devil's Lakes. It starts to really, it hits home. I mean, when you look at it this way, it's like, wow, that does make a difference. And hence, we promote grazing like crazy. And this is partly how we promote grazing. We have what we call pasture walks, and I just finalized our pasture walk list for this coming summer last week. And so we'll start to post that and advertise it, and we try to have one every month or so. Starting in April, we'll have one, and we'll go till October, November. And then we'll have some sort of a seminar in the winter too, just to keep the energy going. And there's a lot of great ideas exchanged here, and it's like the community gets together, and it's really, people really enjoy it. During the pandemic, we had to shut it down, and everybody missed it. And so we were really anxious to get going last year. So in this pasture walk, we're talking about corrals. How do we bring animals in? You know, where are the chutes? It's like organizing that. And here we are at Gabe Bauer's farm. And look at the vegetation here. There's this really lush vegetation. This is an area that was corn and beans, and experiencing, you know, all the fertilizer and the insecticides and the pesticides and, you know, the herbicides, all the sides. I was experiencing that, and now it doesn't experience it at all. It just pulses energy from the sun into the soil. So I like showing this to almost everybody, just the last few months or so. And the reason for it is I think it's important to step back, you know, like 20,000 feet, like just look at the state of our ag economy. And what you'll notice, what I like about this, so we're starting out in 1926, and it ends out in 2016. We're just looking at wealth, we'll just say, in the ag sector. So 1926, you know, farmers held about half of the wealth in the ag sector, roughly. You'll notice right here in 1940s, the war came through. And so we figured out that we can take what we use to make bombs, fertilizer, and we can actually fertilize corn and beans with it. And so all of a sudden, you see an upshot here, basically. And ever since then, we've been separating. So when I say agribusiness, there's nothing personal with people that work in agribusiness. It's not what I'm saying, it's the system. I'm trying to show the system here. And so the system is such, look at over here during the recession, how many farmers went bankrupt. That's why they were leaving in droves. They were not, but agribusiness's share looks pretty good, right? There's a lot of money in agriculture. It's just not within the green lines, right? And so this is the game, right? So like once you see the game and know the rules of the game, now you can maybe change what you do within that game, right? And I know it's your livelihood, and I'm calling it a game, but that is the game, and I don't think we always see how we're getting played in the game, you know? And so once you see it, knowledge is power. Now it's your choice. If you still want to go down that road, that's fine, or you can convert your land to grass and grazing. And so when I say agribusiness, well, we have to, a lot of times we feel the need to till the soil. So tillage implement dealers, that's agribusiness, right? We have to buy the seed. Well, those are patented seeds and they're expensive. That's agribusiness. We have to fertilize. That's agribusiness. Yep, I see that. And we have to spray. That's agribusiness. So and all those tools are agribusiness. That's what I'm talking about when I say agribusiness. Our poor farmers they're not getting, look at that. That's pretty paltry compared to that, how much wealth there is. And so part of the effort then to go to grazing is don't play this game. Play a different game, right? Have your own game. And so to make that game work better, we need people to support these farmers who are playing a different game that are good for all of us and sequestering carbon and protecting our soils. And so one of today's efforts that's our first step towards that, encourage people in town to support our local farmers who are doing all these wonderful things for us. But we don't see it, right? It's not like they're out there advertising it, but we're trying to advertise it here today. I already told you a little bit about Roman, and I reference him a lot in my talk because he was one of my first converts to rotational grazing. And I was completely expecting him to go, I'll give you 10 acres so you can shut up and get away from me, you know? And luckily he didn't do that, and he said, put the whole farm in, so it's like 230 acres into grazing, which is a lot. I was very surprised. And I could safely say that I don't think he'll ever go back. I remember you telling me, Serge, the happiest moment besides getting married and having my kids, you know, was when the combine, his corn picker, was sold. Like, it was just like a weight off, and it was like, I'm turning the page. I'm not playing this game, I'm gonna play a different game, in essence. So Roman has a farm just outside of Rock Springs. I'll let him tell about himself, and I'll just get out of the way. Go ahead.
And I'm Roman Miller, and we have a farm between Rock Springs and Loganville. We have, like you said, 230 acres in the rotational grazing. We did that in 2017, but my wife and I farm that, and then we have 6 children. 3 of them are married now, and we still have 3 at home, so it's getting a little bit less kids around there. But anyway, I guess when I got started, when Serge coming out running numbers, that was the big one. He would come out and give a bunch of ideas before, but he would never really, well, he would run some numbers, but it didn't really mean much until he got me in a corner, and so that worked, and numbers kind of talked to me, I guess. Before that, he was out. He was fixing waterways, like he was saying. We were trying to figure out how to. My driveway was always washing out. We were trying to put in bigger culverts so it'd run more water. And he had it all marked off for us to just take all the culverts out and just put in a big driveway so the water would come off the hills. It would just run across the driveway without taking out my driveway. But in the meanwhile, we got talking about grazing, and with that grazing plan, we put in one waterway, just because there's one waterway. I thought we had to have it because there was always 5-6 foot washouts every year, and we'd go down towards my neighbor's pond and would be greening that up. So we put in a nice big waterway there, and within probably the second year, after I planted everything in the grass, there was no water going down it. It was actually going down beside it, so I pushed it back in, and so that did make a big difference there. And then I did sell my corn planters, all my row crop stuff. So this is kind of our farm layout, and like Serge was saying, the blue line is the water line, and there's roughly, I think, 5 miles of water line we put in, and then about 7 miles of interior fencing with the purple lines, and then the water line's every other one, so you can bring your cattle down one alley, go through the end, and then go back, so you don't only have to do every other line is water. And that system works really good with Serge helping us out, drawing it up. It makes a huge difference. I don't know how. Before he drew it out, I was kind of adding some pasture here and there, trying to play with it. But when we finally did did the whole thing into a farm, it just really made things a lot simpler. And this is how it looked the first year after we took the corn and beans out. There was still some strips going through there where it was end terraced. There was about an 80-acre field there. We kind of the funny part too. I was putting that fence in. It was just starting to green up. I had it planted, and the combines and tractors were going by to plant their fields, and they would almost run off the road watching me wreck my fields because what's that idiot out there doing, putting all those fence rows into his nice field? But I can't blame him. I would have done the same thing. But my goals were keeping the soils from eroding. That was kind of a big push to why I did what I did too. And then how to keep the water on the land. And with this rainfall simulator, that made a big difference when I watched that too. That was really kind of a clincher when you can see the water you're going to keep versus just running. And when my water was running off my fields, it was chocolate brown, just lots and lots of water running off the fields. I guess, and another thing my goal was to keep the soil covered at all times. There's still a lot of space in there, but now, 5 years later, you can't see dirt anywhere. It just keeps getting thicker with the more managed grazing. You don't have to keep planting at all either. I thought maybe actually I had bought a no-till drill when I sold my combines to figure out I would need to interseed, but there's just enough seed in the seed bank where it just keeps filling in which is quite amazing after spraying it for 50 years and abusing it and tilling it. You think those seeds would all be dead, but there's still lots of seeds in there. So this is when I bought a post pounder and started working on my 7 miles of fence line. So that's when I converted all that.
When you say there's seed in there, you mean weed seed or what?
Grass seed, weed seed. Weeds will always come up if you got bare soil. And I've come in to kind of like weeds because, you know, you either did something wrong or it's trying to cover it. So I don't have any problems. Before, you'd lay awake at night trying to figure out what you're going to kill when you had the corn and beans. Because if there's a weed, you need to go after it before it takes over. And now you kind of just go, hey, you're going to get eaten, so it really doesn't matter. It just kind of, it takes a while to train your brain to accept weeds and say, hey, there's actually a lot of good in weeds for your animal health too. It's a deworming agents and some of those. And this is more of the fence line here along the road here. Water line, that was about 5 miles of that, and that just lays on top of the ground on every other row. And as the first year it was kind of exposed, the water was a little bit warm with the sun hitting it, but after the second year you had canopied over the water line, it was always cool for the cattle too. So you really made a big difference when you have water out in your pastures. You don't have to bring them to the barn or anything. That's my water tank there. Serge had kind of talked about how that works, how you have those quick disconnects and you just dump that over, drag it to your next outlet and move your cows. And you want to leave about that much trampling just to keep the soil cool. Like you said, the soil, if you expose it, it gets 30 degrees hotter than the outside temperature. So if you get a 100-degree day, it's going to be 130, and it's going to kill all your soil life for sure. And then if you keep it covered, it stays about 30 degrees cooler, up down to 70 degrees. So that's really important. It's really hard for a farmer to start off to look at that going, oh man, that's a lot of waste. You could go out there and mow that yet and get some bales off it. But after you know what it does, it's like, you know, that's the way it should look. But it does take a while. You're used to that lawn look. And then this is you can kind of figure out how much forage you have ahead of yourself. And that's really optimal forage right there for putting on lots of pounds. It hasn't flowered out yet too bad. Really high protein. This is usually what I put my finisher cattle through, which are the ones that are almost fat, just to put that extra pounds on. Just go through there, clip the tops off. There's a lot of sugar and energy in those tops of those grass. They do really, really good during the summer. And it's just another picture of the height of the grass there. It's almost 1.5 feet tall. It's another water line. That's just the simplicity of the interior fence. You just put a big post on either end, run your high tensile wire, and put in some fiberglass posts in the middle. And it doesn't take much. It's about 32 inches. I think that's about what we have it. And if the calves are born, they can run underneath that wire, and that doesn't really matter, but they can come back without getting shocked. So that's about the right height just for that until they get bigger and then they start hitting it. But if it's too low, if you get them across there, they're going to get shocked. They don't want to come back. So it's kind of a good, that's why we come up with that height there. And there's just more pictures of babies being born out not in the barnyard, they're out in the grass there. And this would be more of the steers that I was finishing. Just looks pretty nice. I wish it would be about now again. It's kind of in the middle of the summer. You don't really think about it, but now it looks kind of strange. But they do really, really good. And then if you move them, my steers a lot of times, if they're close to the house, I'll move them 4 times a day, just because they eat more. You move them once, and they think they're full, and you go out there and you move the wire, well, they're gonna go eat more. So then you give them maybe the same amount, but you just do it in 4. So they're just going to eat more, and then they're going to gain more weight as they eat more. And this was another field that was converted to corn and beans for a long time. Just trying to get some trample down. That field was pretty poor, but it really turned on now in about 3 years. It's really doing really good. That's another thing I probably added, almost doubled my herd since I started, just because every year the grass gets better. You just, with no fertilizer, no inputs, no sprays, no pesticides or fungicides or even the health of the animal. I quit doing the vaccinations, no more deworming. Just don't do anything with them anymore. I'll leave the calves on the cows for about 10 months, and they do just fine. As far as for occasionally you get a couple that don't do that great, but those are usually the ones that go in the finishing pen then too. So keep the ones that do really good on the pasture. There's some that don't, some that do. So just kind of rather than treating the whole herd for a few that don't, just get rid of the ones that don't and go on with the ones that do good. And then I buy most of my hay just because I don't want to. It's cheaper for me it is to buy it versus trying to make it, because then I clip mine down to the dirt and everybody else wants to sell theirs, so I just bring their nutrients in and spread it on my fields for my some of my nutrient plan there too. And this is a cow pie right in the spring, just when it's starting to warm up a little bit and get green. But that's what happens when you don't put all your deworm your cattle, put all the pesticides in your cows too. You reseed. That's all clover seeds in the spring, so you don't really have to. And this was a couple of weeks later. Everything just fills in by itself if you manage it. It's just kind of amazing how it's set up where you don't have to keep throwing money at it. That's the hardest part, is to keep it simple. You always want to do something because that's what farmers do. They want to do something to make it better. And it's hard to just wait a little bit, and then it usually takes care of itself. And this is what had happened in probably a month into that, after it all greened up and how thick it got. And then we were doing some cover crops, just kind of grazing it short, a little shorter than I normally would, and then planting these cover crops in there for winter feed. And that worked really good. A lot of stuff came up. This is when it was getting a little bit taller. There's a 24-way mix I planted in there, and most of it did come up. They planted that for winter grazing then.
What are the forage plants you got, the grasses and forage? Almost looks
sorghum. Sorghum's at the end.
It is sorghum.
Yep, sorghum, and then that was kind of probably about half of it, and then the purple stuff was hairy vetch and sunflowers, and it was just a menagerie of seed. That's when he was getting a little bit taller, ready to head out.
So this is winter pasturage?
Yeah, I just kind of let it go for probably about 60 days before I pastured it. I didn't graze it, just to kind of get more tonnage in there for the cows. Like this is where it was then after a frost. Before it had a frost, the clovers and everything was about knee high. Just everything was just, you couldn't even walk through it. It was so thick. And after a good freeze, all the stuff laid down, and within 2 weeks it was all gone. The ground was bare, and it was just full of holes. All the microbes and stuff had eaten all the stuff on the ground. It was kind of creepy to walk through there, because there's so much life in that soil when you
Then you turn the cattle in there.
Right. Yep. And then I turned the cattle in there. But there was a lot of food in there. Because when I planted that in there, I did a soil sample the next year, and I had gained a full point of organic matter in 1 year. And 1 point is 20,000 gallons of water in one year. The whole farm average was about 0.3% from the whole farm, but just one field when I did that, the roots, just whatever it did, it brought that organic matter way up. And then that's the winter time there, grazing it after the snow came then too. And then some of the benefits from continuous grazing to daily moves, it brings back a diversity of grasses and forbs. And like I say, a lot of the forbs they call it weeds, but some of them have deworming attributes in it, where it actually deworms the cattle too, because the cows kind of know which ones they want. And then if you graze at a higher, rather than taking it down to the ground, if you graze at a higher length, all your worms and stuff for the cattle, they live in that bottom couple inches on your grasses. So if you don't take it down there, you won't have near the trouble with your cattle getting unhealthy with the worms. And then the same way with the birds and a lot of bobolinks and all the stuff you're talking about. I don't know how to pronounce all those birds, but I think I have most of them. They're just everywhere. The butterflies and then the dung beetles too. If you do the pour on with the dewormer on the cattle, it kills your soil life, and it kills all the dung beetles that try to eat the dung to kind of spread it around. It'll kill that. So then you have your cow pies laying out there for a couple of years versus just letting nature take care of itself. Then if you continuous graze, it takes 27 years for a cow pie on every square yard to get. And if you would have daily moves, you can do it once every year. Put a cow pie on every square yard. So that's how you can build your soil too. Then obviously healthy soils, you have healthy animals, and then it translates to healthy people. It all starts definitely in the health of the soil. And we heard the other day that we heard a speaker that he does a lot of testing on his grass-fed beef, and the omega-3s to omega-6s is huge. I think most of his is 3 to 1. It rivals to Alaskan salmon. He has some tested 1.1 to 1, so that's really, really good versus then you start adding grain, it really goes out of whack in a hurry. But it all starts in the soil. You pull nitrogen out of the air. I guess there's like 32 ton of nitrogen above each acre. So as your grass gets higher, it sucks that out and puts it back into the ground. And putting carbon back in the ground where it belongs too, because once you pull that back out in the ground and get your roots, when you grow deep roots with tall grass, you nip that off, the roots die back a little bit. And that's actually what you get a lot of your organic matter from them. You can grow more soil underground almost than you can above ground, just from the roots dying back and forth. And it'd be really hard to do that without adding animals. If you just have a prairie, it does okay, but when you add animals, it really turns it on and gets your carbon back into the ground where it's supposed to be there, and then it grows healthy, nutrient-dense food. And this is what I guess is just on our farm here. 2,400 pounds of soil kept from Narrows Creek. 207 dump truck loads. That's a lot more than I'd want to get rid of. That's about 16 million, I guess, gallons of water per year. 35 miles long. Serge kind of explained this, how this stuff attaches to the soil, and that's not a pretty sight, and you don't really want to go swimming in that. And this is kind of what ours has done now. If we do get a big rain, very seldom we have any runoff, and if it does run off, it's super clear. This was out of I think after 8-inch rain out of our neighbor's 4-acre pond, a big watershed comes into that. But that was just as clear as a Montana river after coming out of, where before that pond would be green every year from when I did the conventional farming, and I'm sure I put a lot of topsoil in his pond too. Yeah, here's after 3-inch rain. These are where the culverts I was going to take out and just put a driveway through, and very seldom it even comes up to the culvert. And then when it does come out, it's not much going on. And that's just amazing when you get a 3-inch rain, and it all soaks in. So then you're a lot more drought tolerant too. And I guess that's kind of what happens when you...
So we should explain that picture though. So we were getting rain after rain after rain after rain, and I said, so Roman, I texted him, I was like, how's it going? He texted me back this picture. He goes, how do you think it's going? He's much more relaxed, I would say. I had a conversation with his wife and his kids, and they're like, I don't know what you did to Roman, but he is a different person. Just a little bit happier, can't stop talking about grazing, a little extra pep in the step, you know. you know, whistling a tune once in a while. I mean, things that you never used to do.
Yeah.
It's bringing out the best in you,
It is.
I would say.
Because you don't know how much pressure conventional farming has on you until you don't have it. It's like you got to worry about the rain, you got to worry about the weather, you got to worry about seed prices, and at the end you're so excited when you break even. So it's like, and I was just getting to the point too, kind of where it just wasn't that much fun because I would be out there late at night by myself combining and hauling it to town, and I still had another job that I work. And yeah, I wouldn't go back if corn was $30 a bushel, I guess. So it's just sustainable and it's profitable.